Emily Blake's second pregnancy went smoothly as planned. However, when she went into labor, she was rushed to the operating room so that doctors could attempt to save both her and the baby. When hope seemed lost, her husband did something incredible. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. Mark and Emily were overjoyed when they discovered they were expecting their second child. They had been trying to conceive for over a year. Their son, Liam, had specifically asked for a younger sibling. Despite being able to determine the baby's gender during the ultrasound, Emily requested that the doctor not tell them. The consultant then wrote the result on a piece of paper and gave it to Emily's friend, who was responsible for planning a small gathering for friends and family. Between sweets and a cake, the announcement was made. Everyone celebrated when purple and pink balloons floated down and stuck to the apartment ceiling, revealing it was a girl. But no one was more emotional than Mark. The soon-to-be father kissed his wife and son, realizing his dream was coming true. It was heartwarming to see how excited the father was for the arrival of his daughter. Then, as a soccer fan, he exclaimed, "I'm going to teach her to play soccer too," which made everyone in the room laugh. Mark and Emily met during their college years. Because of his running skills and being the regional champion at 16, he was admitted to a prestigious university. Unfortunately, due to a knee injury, he couldn't compete professionally, but he did run for the university team. His best performance, he always claimed, happened during campus practice. Mark noticed Emily, a beautiful girl he had never seen before, after sprinting a lap and sending a ball into the sky. She was with a friend. "That was the best run of my life because it brought me to you," Mark told Emily during their wedding vows in front of all the guests. Emily's graduation ceremony was simple and elegant. A year later, Mark traded his running shoes for a calculator to become an engineer, but he remained a soccer fan. His greatest joy in life was the birth of Liam, who was already kicking balls with his father at the age of 3. Mark and Emily never expected their son to be as athletic as his father. They enjoyed playing soccer in the yard, and he loved taking him to soccer games. Mark and Liam used to lie next to Emily in bed, listening to the baby's kicks and movements as they awaited the arrival of their daughter. Everything seemed perfect, but the family's fate would take a dramatic turn. As the baby's due date approached, Mark and Emily purchased more items to ensure her comfort. A crib, colorful clothes, toys, and an abundance of diapers filled the baby's room. The delivery date was set for 10 days later. Emily was calm because she had gone through this process before and thought she knew what would happen. However, something unexpected happened in the penultimate week. Emily awoke to the sensation of a slight contraction. However, because it did not appear serious, she and her husband went to the hospital with little concern. They wanted to ensure everything ran smoothly. During the doctor's appointment, however, the contractions became more intense, and her water broke. That's when things began to go wrong for Emily, who became dizzy and nauseated. She felt sick as the contractions disrupted her breakfast. She hadn't experienced this with her first birth, but she assumed it wouldn't be a big deal. Who knows? Her daughter had simply announced her arrival earlier than expected. Emily, however, was mistaken. She passed out in front of the doctor a few minutes later. Mark was terrified. He'd never seen his wife in that condition, and not even a soccer player's focus could have prepared him for it. "What's happening? What's wrong with her?" He'd ask in vain to a team rattled by the unexpected event. Emily's heart rate slowed, and her blood pressure dropped to 0. She turned blue and appeared to struggle to breathe as the doctor and nurses tried to understand what had happened. Her body was soon on a bed, connected to various devices that monitored her health and the baby's condition. The issue was that the baby's vital signs began to decline as well. Mark felt a shiver run down his spine. He couldn't do anything and could only stand there, stunned. Finally, the medical team realized they needed to act quickly and ran additional tests. Emily had an amniotic fluid embolism, a rare allergic reaction that occurs when amniotic fluid enters the mother's bloodstream. As a result, the heart and lungs stop functioning. She was transferred to a different section of the maternity unit, closer to where the surgery would take place. Mark was refused entry by the nurses. He insisted that he needed to be with his wife and daughter. Even so, the nurses warned him that the situation was critical and that the doctors needed to focus because she might not survive. If Emily survived, she might never be the same. When Mark heard that, he felt the weight of the world fall on his shoulders. In the maternity ward hallway, he wanted to punch the walls until his fists bled. Instead, he knelt and rested his head against the wall, using all his strength to quietly talk to himself. Those who saw the scene couldn't tell if he was praying or hoping for the best. However, it was a terrifying scene. Mark needed to be strong because he was about to face one of his most painful defeats. Emily's condition worsened in the operating room, and no precautions taken by the medical team could prevent the worst. Emily was pronounced dead at 10:20 a.m. that morning. Despite the terrible situation, there was no time to mourn. The team was still determined to save the baby. Mark, on the other hand, was pacing back and forth outside. He couldn't handle it. The couple had spent the previous months preparing for the baby's arrival, imagining what family life would be like, and fantasizing about their baby's face. They hadn't even decided on a name yet. They wanted to see their daughter and then name her. And now he was alone, having to say goodbye to the woman he'd met by chance 10 years ago at a soccer game. Mark was terrified and helpless. He'd never been through anything like that before and was taken aback. Even so, he tried not to lose his cool. His daughter was still fighting, and he wouldn't give up if there was a 1% chance of turning the situation around. But he couldn't let his wife go without a fight. Mark then took on the challenge in the only way he knew how. He got down on one knee and asked the most painful and honest question of his life. "I know this is more than I can take, and maybe it's more than I can ask. Maybe that means there's a plan and a reason for all of this. That's what I'm going to believe. All I ask is that you let me hug my wife one more time," Mark said from the hallway floor. He was in desperate need. He then stood up and called his family and friends, asking them to come to the maternity ward as soon as possible. They held hands once everyone was in the waiting room. They reaffirmed their wishes and prayers for Emily and the baby. The pleas spread on those people's social networks, and soon people who didn't know Emily or Mark expressed their support for the family, hoping for the best. After prayers, everyone gathered in a corner to wait for better news. Emily was still in the operating room, and doctors were attempting one last desperate resuscitation. Fortunately, the girl was saved by the child's care team. She was born crying, but more importantly, she was separated from her mother and would live. Despite the victory, it was unclear whether the newborn could be comforted by her mother on her first day of life. Mark was crying and laughing at the same time as he held his daughter. The sensation was indescribable in both good and bad ways. He'd heard about these strange experiences that mess with one's mind and senses, but it wasn't until now that he realized what they meant and how difficult they were to explain. He had no doubts about what name to give the girl in the few minutes he had to look at her. Hope, that's what she'd be called. Mark was content with having hope, but the prospect of losing his wife cast a dark cloud over his happiness. Then fate took a chance on the former athlete's optimism. Emily, according to the doctor, had responded to the most recent resuscitation attempt. Even if her pulse remained low, she was at least breathing again. Nobody knew what had happened, but the doctor said they would do whatever it took to get her stable again. Mark embraced his family and friends. When he heard those words, it was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Emily was transferred to the ICU, where doctors did everything they could to keep her breathing. However, she began to experience a drop in vital signs once more. Emily's brother, a surgeon, arrived at the hospital and requested access to her medical records. He knew it was a bad idea and that the risks were high, but he did learn that his sister was having a heart attack. He went into the waiting room and informed everyone of the situation. It was a bleak and frightening moment. Mark then stood up, looked at his newborn daughter, and decided to visit his wife in the ICU. While the doctors and nurses checked the charts, monitored the situation via graphs on the screen, and administered medication, the engineer approached Emily and took her hand. "I will always love you. Hope is already with me, and she is stunning and flawless." Please fight if you still have some strength. Mark was convinced that his wife's condition would improve, but Emily's did not. Despite 2 blood transfusions, the situation was still classified as critical. Her heart was failing, and she was getting less and less blood pumped through her body. Her lungs eventually stopped working, and she had to rely on machines to breathe. Emily was out cold and unconscious. She could have died at any time, but one of the doctors noticed something that had previously gone unnoticed. He saw that one of the organs had been cut by mistake, and was still bleeding without any attention being paid to it while reassessing one of the exams and looking at the patient's situation. Then, just as she was about to be declared dead for the second time, she was wheeled into another hospital's operating room. The building was better suited to that situation. It had an extracorporeal membrane oxygenation machine. This would restore the ability of the heart and lungs to function. They also reduced Emily's level of sedation until she awoke so they could assess how well her nervous system was functioning. Mark walked back into the room and was right in her line of sight when he saw Emily showing signs of life again. "Hi, my love," he said, taking her hand. Emily returned the smile, despite her confusion and disappointment. The doctors hadn't anticipated such a reaction after everything she'd been through. Not only was her brain not dead, but her nervous system was functioning better than usual. Mark realized at that point that there was a way to permanently save Emily. The doctors then informed her that they were going to try a new surgery on her, and that she would soon pass out from the anesthesia. Mark brought Hope running and placed the newborn for the first time in Emily's lap, allowing the mother to touch her daughter for the first time. "My love, her name is Hope. Our daughter has arrived and is healthy. We'll be waiting for you when you wake up," Mark exclaimed, choked up with emotion. Emily was frail, but the look on her face and in her eyes changed dramatically. Seeing and feeling her daughter seemed to awaken something within the woman and help her regain her strength. Emily was determined to fight for her life. Emily fell back asleep as soon as the anesthesiologist administered the medication. Mark had nothing to do but look after Hope and wait. Liam was at his grandparents' house and had no idea his mother was in such danger. The entire episode was the most difficult test of faith and resilience that Mark and many of his friends and family had ever faced. Finally, the surgery was over, and Emily's condition was miraculously stabilized. The doctors were exhausted and puzzled by this point. How could a woman's body experience both death and the birth of life? Mark wept in relief. He almost couldn't tell his parents the good news over the phone because he was still shaking. They could now come to the maternity ward to meet Hope and bring her brother with them. Emily was able to breathe normally again after the ventilator was removed 24 hours later. Mark, Liam, and little Hope finally got to talk to her after a few hours of waiting. Emily had clearly been through a lot, but she couldn't recall much of it. Despite her lack of strength and heavy head, she wanted to hold her daughter in her arms one more time. Mark helped her by placing the child on her lap. Emily's eyes welled up with tears as Hope opened her eyes and met her mother's for the first time. Mark sat down next to his wife and quietly thanked God. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.